Even though a pope has never officially recognized this linen cloth as the one that covered the body of Jesus after his crucifixion, the Holy Shroud is nonetheless the most prized relic of the Catholic Church and one of the most intriguing objects in the world. Its dimensions are 14.3 feet long and 3.7 feet wide. It's a linen cloth, and it has a pattern that coincides with the way other cloths were woven in the early centuries, especially in Syria. We found cloths similar to this one in the tombs of wealthy people. This one covered the body of someone who was crucified. So the question is, who was this person? Typically, people who were crucified were left in mass graves since they were usually poor or criminals. But Jesus was taken to a grave fit for a rich person, which belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. He wrapped Jesus in a beautiful cloth. The Holy Shroud depicts the body of a man who endured wounds consistent with the crucifixion. Investigators say the man was between 30 and 40 years old and weighed about 175 pounds. More than likely, he was involved in manual labor. The man in the shroud suffered roughly 720 wounds and at least 120 lashes. From the wounds depicted in the shroud, the whips probably had 6 strings and were bound together by a sharp object. He was beaten violently on his face, and more than likely he had a head cover of thorns. This because the forehead and neck showed traces of blood dripping from the top of the head. He carried a heavy object on his left shoulder and had wounds on his knees.
The person depicted in the shroud suffered wounds that are consistent with the descriptions of the Gospel, from lashes to a crown of thorns and the crucifixion.
His left wrist shows a nail puncture, and bloodstains show that the right wrist endured a similar wound. The left side of the man's torso was also punctured with what seems to be a spear. The shroud doesn't show any traces of brushstrokes, and it is indelible. That's why one of the biggest mysteries is how it actually came about. Italian scientists have their own theory on what could have happened. It shows dehydration, a very superficial oxidation of cellulose. It's identical to the ultraviolet radiation that we would get from the use of a laser. The only possible explanation I see is that a great current of light was released from the body when it was wrapped in the sheet. So for those who believe in the resurrection, this means quite a lot. There are traces of myrrh and aloe on the shroud. These two materials were widely used in burials in the Middle East. It also has pollen from 58 different plants. 38 of them are not European, and 17 of them can be traced back to Jerusalem. The bloodstains on the shroud are AB blood type, with large traces of bilirubin, which is a sign of someone who suffered a violent death. The blood has not moved or even been smeared on the shroud. It's as if the body disappeared within the linen cloth. The shroud is like a photographic negative. Unlike other average photographs, though, it looks clearly when seen as a negative and not the other way around. But nevertheless, a carbon-14 test carried out back in 1988 concluded that the fabric is from medieval times, around the year 1260. Some experts say the tests were not carried out properly, and the samples, they argue, were probably contaminated. The shroud has some patches, and the sample they used in that study has traces of cotton. That right there brings up a lot of doubts.
Many studies have been carried out to determine if the techniques to develop the image on the shroud actually existed in medieval times. Many hypotheses have come about, but in the end, they show that the results don't add up. They have no explanation for how the image was imprinted on the Holy Shroud.
Centuries have passed, but the Holy Shroud continues to be one of the most intriguing objects in Christianity, and perhaps physical proof of Jesus' resurrection.